Jonathan also tells me that while Sandy is alive and well in the hospital, he doesn't know how to answer the phone. So that unless he has a visitor and you try to call him, it'll be hard to reach. But I think how do you want to handle this, Jonathan?
Handle visitors or handle what's the?
Handle people wanting to get in touch with you.
Well, anybody, I mean, what we've done is I just hold the cell phone on speaker in front of him and he talks and we can do calls that way if somebody wants to schedule them. Just, oop.
Don't want you to
No,
forget
let
this.
me know. He's also, he's accepting visitors.
Okay, so now I would like to give the mic. I'm going to ask everybody to identify him or herself, please. And I'm not sure if this is our most long-range visitor, but I know he's from Chester, Connecticut, among other places.
Hi, this is Phil Scheffler. I just wanted to remark that Sandy and I went to City College together. We were in the same class. We were not friendly at that time. We edited competing newspapers. I don't know if you remember that City College had 2 undergraduate newspapers at that time. Sandy edited the conventional, traditional newspaper, and I edited the somewhat left-wing newspaper at the time. I'll just tell you one little story. That somehow or another we managed to scrape, they were both weekly newspapers, and somehow or another we managed to scrape together enough money so that we could come out 3 times a week instead of once. And the next week, Sandy wrote an editorial in his newspaper wanting to know where the Moscow gold was coming from. So we remained in that position until Sandy showed up at CBS some 8 or 9 years later. And over the next 40 years, sometimes he was my boss and sometimes I was his boss. But we remained very, very close friends to this day.
Sandy played a very important role in my life as a journalist. And even though I was at the rival City College paper, the Moscow edition of the City College paper, Observation Post, Sandy, you know, at that period of time, it was very hard to get a job in journalism, and we were all worried about how we would get a job. But Sandy, we had heard, had gotten a job at the New York Times, and he had a very important job. He used to write the headlines on the New York Times bulletins around Times Square. So he wrote, Dodgers win 2-1. And that inspired me. And then in all the years that I was the television critic at Newsday, Sandy would really tell me what was going on at CBS. And of course I wouldn't quote him. But the other thing that impressed me about Sandy is that he was the one who wrote that line, and that's the way it is. At least that's what he told me. Thank you.
Hi, Jerry Paul Gates. I knew Sandy quite well. Just a couple of things. When I went to work for CBS News in 1969 and ended up writing for the Cronkite Show, for those of you who are not familiar with the system, the writers are sort of the trolls, subterranean. And above that were keep her on air and all again. Right, Bob? And our editor was a guy named John Merriman, who anyone who was involved with Cronkite News of those years loved and revered. And I just latched on to him, and whenever I had a question, what do I do about this or do about that? He'd say, ask Socolow, ask Socolow, ask Socolow. And, you know, okay, after 2 days I began to get it, and I looked at the thing, and Socolow was the second in command to a legendary figure in journalism named Leslie Midgley, who had worked for all kinds of things. And so at one point I worked up my courage and I said to Merriman, well, what does Les Midgley do? And he said, Mr. Midgley discusses the lineup with God. Years later, when I was writing a book about CBS News called Airtime, I interviewed Sandy, and I told him that story, and he said, well, I don't know about that, but he sure as hell discussed the lineup with me. A couple of other points about Sandy. He was an extraordinary stickler for precision. At one point during the trial of Von Buell, remember that? One of the more edifying episodes we had. There was something that puzzled him, and people were trying to figure out what it is. He said, oh, just a second. What exactly is second-degree murder? And nobody could explain it. He said, okay, before you use that term again, go find out. And he loved to tell the story about Gordon Manning when he was an AP writer in Boston. And Manning had done a story where someone had died suddenly. And his editor said to him, Gordon, we all die suddenly. I believe you meant unexpectedly. And with that as a cue, I told him one of my more humbling experiences when I worked at UPI. The Duke and Duchess of Windsor were coming to town, as they did every year, and I rather mindlessly wrote that they checked in to the Waldorf Astoria for their annual New York vacation. The next day I went in, my copy was in the box, and there was a circle around the word vacation, and a line said, vacation from what? That was Socolow.
I'm Mike Candell, and Sandy Socolow and I shared something that some other people in this room share as well. We were both copy boys at the New York Times. And when Sandy left the New York Times at the invitation of Uncle Sam during the Korean War, and entered the Army and went to Officers Candidate School, emerged as a lieutenant, got sent to Tokyo, where he ran the broadcast in Chinese and Korean that went to those folks with the version of news that I guess the precursor of the CIA thought was appropriate. Even though Sandy didn't speak a word of Korean or Japanese, but he was in charge. So when he got himself discharged over there, which was not an easy accomplishment, and he messaged the city editor of the New York Times, some of us worked for him, named Robert Garst, who was a rather austere, forbidding personage at the New York Times, and Sandy told him about his great adventures in the Army in communications, and that he would like to be the New York Times correspondent in the Far East. And Robert Garst messaged him back in saying, Sandy, that won't work, but we are saving your job as copy boy. So fortunately for everyone, including Sandy and CBS and INS hired him as it's roving. For those of you who are too young, I notice one person here who fits that category. INS is the I in UPI, right? Okay. Well, fortunately, INS hired him as its roving Far East correspondent, and as we've heard, the rest is history.
Sandy, my husband Sam, Bernie Seabrooks, who's a name many of you know, and Ted Holmes, another name. About 4 or 5 years ago, started a luncheon club where they would meet once a week at the diner next to CBS, which would give them separate checks. We call them the Romeos, retired old men eating out. Several years ago, my husband was in the hospital for a long, scary siege. And anybody who knows Sandy will recognize this. He was just there. If anybody met Sandy Socolow today, they would never in a million years know that he was one of the single most powerful, respected people in our business. He's the most modest person in the business. When Sam was sick, Sandy just appeared. Take me to lunch, go visit Sam. He was never a friend whose friendship became a tyranny. When Sandy got sick, would he let you bring him dinner? Would he let you return the favor? No. Sandy was too modest, too gentle, too kind. I treasure his friendship, and I know my husband did. Here.
Thank you. I will say that Sandy told me in the hospital today that he was sorry that the other guy, he and Myron Candell hung around with Carl Spielberger, was not here tonight, but he was going to have to delay being Carl's beard at Artie's Delicatessen to eat corned beef and pastrami against Carl's wife's wishes. Anybody else want to talk? Otherwise, I think we've had a wonderful evening, and I want to thank Wendy again for the great job, and I want to remind everybody that Carol Lawson is going to be on their tails. And we're going to have a Better Than Ever awards committee. And do not forget Betsy Ashton saying, put your name tags back in that bowl, please. The silver bowl outside. And finally, again, our next lunch will be Thursday, January 15th. Norman Pearlstein, former managing editor of the Wall Street Journal, former executive editor of Forbes, former chief content officer at Bloomberg, 15, Thursday the 15th. And now again, the chief content officer at Time Inc. Many of you may know him. He's been a controversial figure in his long, distinguished career. And I'll look forward to you all grilling him. Until then, thank you very much.